Dr. Dumo, the healer whose skill and compassion were unparalleled. Dumo, a tall, kind-eyed man in his early 30s, was often seen walking to the homes of the sick, his leather satchel clutched in hand. For as long as anyone could remember, he had been the pillar of the community, his modest clinic a sanctuary for women and children alike. But Dumo wasn't just a doctor. He was a symbol of hope. His presence brought calm to laboring mothers, and his hands, gentle, steady, seemed to defy death itself. Among those who admired him was Eka, the sharp-witted midwife. Eka had apprenticed under Dumo for years and often watched him work with awe. She dreamed of being more than his assistant. She wanted to be his partner in both medicine and life. Yet, she buried her feelings, knowing Dumo's focus was on his patients and his ailing mother. One evening, as the village children played in the fading light and the elders gathered under the irako tree, Dumo returned home to find his mother lying weak on her mat. Her breaths were shallow, her face pale. "Mother," he said, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell me you were unwell?" Her soft smile belying her pain, brushed off his concern. "I'm old, my son. This is the way of things." But Dumo wasn't convinced. As he placed his hand on her forehead, he felt her skin burning. Her pulse was irregular. That night, he stayed by her side, racked with worry. By morning, he made a decision. He needed help beyond what his modest clinic could provide. The next day, the village elders gathered beneath the great irako tree. Among them was Chief Okechi, a man whose booming voice often commanded both respect and fear. Okechi, clad in his flowing agbada, was a figure of power in Ajuru, but his eyes often lingered too long on things that weren't his: land, women, even respect. "Ya is gravely ill," Dumo began, his voice steady but urgent. "Her illness is beyond my expertise. I must take her to the city hospital." The elders murmured amongst themselves. City hospitals were not meant for simple villagers. Their fees were exorbitant. Yet, Dumo's reputation was his shield. "We will help you," Baba Ifam, the eldest of the council, said. "You have saved so many lives, Dumo. It is time for us to repay you." The villagers pooled their resources, donating what little they could. But as the days went by, it became clear the funds would not suffice. As Dumo began charging small fees for his services, the villagers whispered among themselves. They were used to his generosity, and this shift felt like a betrayal. Among the murmuring crowd was Kore, a childhood friend of Dumo who had left Ajuru years ago to seek wealth in the city. Kore had returned recently, draped in fine clothes and flaunting his newfound fortune. Kore had always envied Dumo. While Kore was brash and impulsive, Dumo's steady demeanor had always won the villagers' hearts. And now, seeing Dumo's struggles, Kore saw an opportunity. "Dumo is no saint," Kore said to a group of villagers one evening. "He pretends to care, but now he asks for money like any other businessman. How long before he forgets us entirely?" These words spread like wildfire, sowing seeds of doubt in the hearts of the people. One fateful night, as Dumo sat outside his clinic, burdened by despair, Kore approached him. "My friend," Kore said, sitting beside him. "You seem troubled." Dumo hesitated, but eventually confided in him. He spoke of his mother's worsening condition, the lack of funds, and the growing resentment of the villagers. Kore listened intently, then leaned closer. "I know someone who can help," Kore said. "But his help comes with conditions." Dumo frowned. "What kind of conditions?" Kore smiled. "He is willing to pay handsomely for baby placentas. He believes they have great medicinal value. All you have to do is set them aside after deliveries." Dumo was horrified. "Those belong to the mothers. I could never." "Think about it," Kore interrupted. "You're drowning, my friend. Your mother's life hangs in the balance, and these villagers have turned their backs on you. Sometimes we must make difficult choices for the ones we love." Kore's words haunted Dumo. For days, he wrestled with his conscience. Ya's condition worsened, and her frail voice reminded him of the urgency of her situation. Desperation clouded his judgment, and one night, with trembling hands, he agreed. The next delivery at the clinic was a success. As the new mother cradled her baby, Dumo wrapped the placenta in cloth and handed her a bundle of rags. "Here is your placenta," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Go bury it as tradition demands." That night, beneath the cover of darkness, Dumo handed the real placenta to Kore, who exchanged it for a heavy sack of coins. With the money, Dumo took Ya to the city hospital, where she received the care she needed. Her recovery was swift, and when she returned to Ajuru, the villagers celebrated. But the villagers' joy masked a growing darkness within Dumo. What he had promised would be a one-time act became a repeated betrayal. With each placenta he handed over, his guilt deepened. Eka, ever observant, began to notice inconsistencies. Why did Dumo insist on handling the placentas himself? Why were they always wrapped so hastily? Her suspicions grew, but she kept them to herself, watching and waiting. The village of Ajuru, though quiet on the surface, began to murmur beneath the weight of unease. The once harmonious relationship between Dumo and his people had shifted. Some villagers noticed how his demeanor had changed. His once warm eyes now carried a flicker of something darker, and he often avoided direct conversations. Yet they were also indebted to him. Dumo had returned to offering free services, and Ya's recovery was celebrated as a miracle. The villagers attributed her healing to Dumo's skill, unaware of the secret dealings that funded her treatment. One evening, under the glow of a crescent moon, Kore met with Chief Okechi in the chief's private courtyard. The air smelled of roasted yams and palm wine, but the tension between the two men was palpable. "You've been doing well for yourself, Kore," Okechi began, swirling his wine in a carved gourd. "But you're playing a dangerous game." Kore stiffened. "What do you mean?" Okechi leaned forward, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Do you think I don't know about your little deal with Dumo? Placentas are a powerful commodity, but they're also a dangerous secret. If the villagers find out, who do you think they'll blame? You or their precious doctor?" Kore's jaw tightened. "I've taken all the risks. Without me, Dumo wouldn't have gone along with it." "Exactly," Okechi said, his lips curling into a sly smile. "Which is why you'll cut me in. From now on, I'll take the placentas, and you'll share the profits with me. Otherwise..." Okechi didn't need to finish the sentence. His threat hung in the air like a noose. Kore had no choice but to agree. Meanwhile, Eka couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She had always admired Dumo, but his recent behavior was troubling. Why had he suddenly found the money to pay for his mother's treatment? Why did he insist on handling the placentas alone? One afternoon, as she cleaned the clinic, she noticed a ledger tucked away in a drawer. It was Dumo's record of patient visits, but something about it didn't add up. The entries for women who had given birth were incomplete, as though details had been deliberately left out. Eka decided to confront him. That evening, as Dumo prepared to close the clinic, she stepped into his office. "Dumo," she began, her voice firm but gentle, "there's something I need to ask you." He looked up, his expression guarded. "What is it?" "The placentas," Eka said, watching his reaction closely. "Why do you always insist on handling them yourself?" "It's unusual." Dumo froze, his heart pounding. He forced a smile. "It's a matter of hygiene, Eka. You know how careful I am with these things." But Eka wasn't convinced. Careful enough to lie to the mothers about how they're handled? Her words hit like a hammer. For a moment, Dumo considered confessing everything, but the weight of his secret was too great. Instead, he deflected. "You don't know what you're accusing me of," he said, his voice cold. "Focus on your work, Eka, and leave the rest to me." Eka left the clinic, but her suspicion only deepened. As weeks passed, Chief Okechi began to manipulate the situation to his advantage. He subtly spread rumors about Kore, painting him as a greedy outsider who had returned to exploit the village. At the same time, he maintained a friendly relationship with Dumo, ensuring the doctor remained dependent on him. One evening, Kore confronted Okechi. "You're cutting me out," Kore said, his voice shaking with anger. "Don't think I don't see what you're doing." Okechi laughed, a low, menacing sound. "Cutting you out? You're lucky I haven't exposed you. Remember, Kore, you're expendable. Dumo, on the other hand, is valuable, at least for now." Kore left the meeting fuming. His envy of Dumo, already simmering, began to burn uncontrollably. He decided it was time to take matters into his own hands. Despite the money flowing in, Dumo was tormented by guilt. Every time he looked at Ya, he was reminded of the price he had paid to save her. He tried to justify his actions by telling himself it was for the greater good, but the weight of his lies grew heavier with each passing day. One night, as he sat alone in his clinic, Kore stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "We have a problem," Kore said, slamming a bag of coins onto the table. "What now?" Dumo asked, his voice weary. "Okechi," Kore spat. "He's using you, Dumo. He's been taking the placentas for himself and cutting me out of the deal." "We need to end this," Dumo said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kore scoffed. "End it? You're in too deep, my friend. If you try to stop now, Okechi will destroy you, and so will the villagers when they find out the truth." Eka, determined to uncover what Dumo was hiding, decided to follow him one night. She watched from the shadows as he left the clinic, a bundle in his hands. She trailed him to a secluded spot near the river, where he met with Okechi. From her hiding place, Eka overheard their conversation. "You'll get your share," Okechi said, taking the bundle from Dumo. "But remember, if this ever gets out, you'll be the one they blame, not me." Eka's heart sank. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The man she had admired for so long had betrayed the trust of the village. Eka, now armed with the damning truth, returned to her hut, her mind racing. The man she had admired, the healer who had brought life into the world, was selling the very essence of that life for gold. But confronting him wasn't enough. Eka knew she needed proof, and she needed to act quickly. The next morning, Eka visited Muna, a close friend and fellow midwife. They had worked together under Dumo's guidance for years. Eka trusted Muna, though the burden of her discovery weighed heavily on her. "Muna," Eka began cautiously, "have you noticed anything strange about Dumo recently?" Muna hesitated. "Strange? Well, he's been quieter than usual. And come to think of it, he's been unusually secretive after deliveries." Eka leaned closer. "I followed him last night. I saw him meeting Chief Okechi by the river. He gave him something, a bundle. And I think it was a placenta." Muna gasped. "That's impossible. Why would he do such a thing?" "I don't know yet," Eka replied, "but we need to find out. We owe it to the mothers, and the village." The two women devised a plan to gather evidence. They would watch Dumo closely during the next birth, ensuring he didn't handle the placenta alone. 2 days later, a young woman named Amara went into labor. Her cries filled the air as Dumo, Eka, and Muna worked together to deliver the baby. It was a difficult birth, but under Dumo's skilled hands, the child was born healthy, and Amara was soon resting peacefully. As Dumo prepared to handle the placenta, Eka and Muna exchanged a glance. "Let me take care of it," Eka said, stepping forward. Dumo froze. "That's not necessary. I'll handle it." "But I insist," Eka replied, her tone firm. Muna stepped beside her, adding, "We're here to help, Dumo." Dumo's eyes darted between them, panic flashing across his face. He reluctantly handed over the placenta, but Eka noticed his hands trembling. Later, as Eka examined the placenta, she discovered a small mark, a symbol carved into the flesh. Her heart sank. She had seen this symbol before, etched into the amulets worn by Chief Okechi's guards. Eka and Muna decided to confront Okechi. Under the cover of darkness, they approached his compound, where the chief was holding a private meeting with Kore. Hiding in the shadows, they overheard their conversation. "You think you can control me?" Kore snarled, his voice filled with venom. "Without me, you wouldn't have those placentas. And without me," Okechi shot back, "you'd be rotting in some gutter." Dumo's guilt was consuming him. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The faces of the mothers haunted him, their trust a constant reminder of his betrayal. One night, Ya found him sitting outside their hut, staring at the stars. "My son," she said softly, sitting beside him. "What troubles you?" Dumo couldn't bring himself to look at her. "I've done something terrible, mother. Something I can never undo." Ya placed a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever it is, Dumo, you must face it. The truth has a way of coming out, whether we're ready or not." Her words pierced through him, but he couldn't confess, not to her, not yet. They gathered the village elders under the Irako tree, including Baba Ifem and Chief Okechi. The air was tense, the elders sensing that something serious was about to unfold. Eka stepped forward, holding the marked placenta wrapped in cloth. "There is a grave betrayal in our village," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Dr. Dumo, the man we have trusted with our lives, has been selling the placentas of our women." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Dumo, who had been standing silently at the back, stepped forward, his face pale. "That's a lie!" Chief Okechi interjected, his voice booming. "Eka, how dare you accuse Dumo without proof?" Eka held up the marked placenta. "This symbol," she said, pointing to it, "is yours, Chief. You've been working with Dumo and Kore to profit off the trust of this village." The crowd erupted in confusion and anger. Dumo, unable to bear the weight of the accusations, fell to his knees. "It's true," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's all true." The villagers turned to Chief Okechi, demanding answers. But the chief, cunning as ever, deflected the blame. "Dumo was the one who started this," he said. "I only got involved to protect the village's interests." He's the one who sold the placentas. Kore, realizing he was being thrown under the bus as well, stepped forward. Lies! Kore shouted. Okechi has been running this operation from the start. He threatened me and Dumo to keep us in line. The elders demanded silence, their faces grim. Baba Ifem stepped forward, his voice heavy with disappointment. Dumo, Okechi, Kore, you have all betrayed this village. Your greed and deceit have tainted the trust we placed in you. Dumo was banished from Ajuru, his name now a cautionary tale. As he left the village, Ya watched from their hut, tears streaming down her face. Forgive me, mother, Dumo said, his voice breaking. Ya shook her head. I would have rather died than see you fall so low, my son. Chief Okechi and Kore were stripped of their positions, their wealth confiscated and redistributed to the villagers. Eka and Muna took over the clinic, vowing to restore the trust that had been broken. Years later, Dumo, now a wanderer, returned to the outskirts of Ajuru. He never entered the village, but he watched from afar as the people thrived under Eka's care. He had lost everything, his home, his mother's pride, his purpose, but he vowed to spend the rest of his life seeking redemption.